let's start this.
Nope.
All right, thank you very much. Appreciate that. And we are officially starting our Pleasant Valley, Fillmore Pyru Basin GSA meeting. I don't know which meeting I'm at. Appreciate everyone being here today. And with that, we'll have a roll call. Thank you.
Pledge allegiance.
Oh, sorry, Pledge of Allegiance. Can I get our Director Pace to lead us on the pledge, please?
Ready to begin. I pledge
allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. I didn't have my agenda in front of me. And next we have roll call, right?
Okay. Director Jackson.
Here.
Director Kimball.
Here.
Chair Long.
Here.
Director Pace.
Here.
Director Villaseñor is not here. Okay. Okay, that's it for.
All right. Thank you very much. And next to the public comments, do we have any?
I don't see any messages or any raised hands.
Okay. So then I am still trying to pull up the agenda. So can we move to the next item?
Oh, now it looks like we have Director Villaseñor.
Okay, good.
Apologies for being late.
Oh, thank you very much. So approval of the agenda, we have Director Villaseñor, and can we get a second?
Second.
Thank you. So we have that and a roll call, please.
Okay. Director Jackson.
Aye.
Director Kimball. Chair Long.
Aye.
Director Pace.
Aye.
Director Villaseñor. She's
Aye.
okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And appreciate that, Director Jackson. Appreciate you being here too. I just got a text, sorry, that Candace will not be at the meeting. She's having an auto issue. And so she sends her apologies to everyone. So next up is the director's announcement. So we have our Fillmore Pumpers Association.
We have not met, so we have nothing to report.
Okay, and our Pyru Pumpers Association.
We have met, but we didn't quite get it all in time for this agenda. So we had a special board meeting to do some reorganization at the Pumpers Association with my change in position. And so we have that. And so for our next meeting, we'll be having presenting my replacement. And the person we're going to that it will be presented is on the call with us tonight, and that's Carol Fornoff. But officially, we'll do that next week or next month. Sorry.
Well, thank you for Carol being here today and really being engaged beforehand. So thank you. Okay, and next we have Candace is not here, which I just explained. So the City of Fillmore, Director Villaseñor.
Hi, yes, and my updates are from our last month. Just to let you know that we, as a city, did do our update to our city urban water plan. That was adopted by our city council, and I think I informed you that we had been working on a couple of wells, doing some maintenance to our city wells, and those have been funded and are in the works. So we appear to be pretty good in terms of our water, maintaining our wells and having our water plan updated. Thanks.
Wonderful, thank you. And for the County of Ventura, it's been a very somber time. Many probably have already heard, but we lost Ventura County Supervisor Carmen Ramirez. There's been many articles in the Star or the Santa Paula Times. It's just a really unfortunate event, and wishing her family and friends just all the best getting through this really tough time. And you know, speaking of her, she was just talking about water at our last board meeting and having our public works present on water. making sure that our communities and our businesses have the water they need. You know, social justice, she's just a passionate person, and I'm just really very sad that we have lost her. So that's where our focus is really been. So at least our board's focus. So that's just, yeah.
Oh,
So,
please accept our condolences.
Oh, yeah, Tony Emmerich, were you going to do the
we
moment of
could-
silence?
Yeah, if we can close a moment of silence for her and her family, I would.
And Chair Long, I believe you skipped past Director
Board.
Kimball's report.
Thank you. I did. I'm really off tonight. Apologize. So, Director Kimball, you wearing your United hat today, and always.
So the United Board was dark this month, so I have no updates.
Okay. Thank you very much. And our Executive Director update, Mr. Emmer.
I do have a few things. I know you're shocked and surprised by that. Regarding our groundwater sustainability planning grant, we have completed our 13th quarter. It's hard to believe it's been that long. And earlier this week, we submitted the progress report and invoice. So we're still in good standing with DWR and submitting those as we can or as we're required. A little bit of an update on groundwater charges as your board approved the late fees and interest waived. So those have all been waived, and staff is working to send out updates. As you remember, in order to save money, essentially pumpers report their pumping to United, and then United compiles that in an Excel spreadsheet for these two basins and shares that with the GSA, so we don't have to have a separate mailing. So that is taking place this week, and likely next week that will be consolidated, and the invoices will be able to go out for the January to June 2022 pumping period. And then those statements should reflect also the late fees and interest waivers that your board approved. A little update on AB 2201. I think our legal counsel is going to talk on that also, but it did pass the Senate Committee on Appropriations after an amendment, and it's still on that committee for a third reading coming up sometime in the future. I won't go into the details but that one's still moving along. We had originally had Santa Clarita Valley Sanitation District tentatively scheduled to present tonight on their chloride removal program, but we have a pretty heavy agenda and we didn't want to go extra long. And so they've agreed to come back at the September 22nd meeting, I believe. Actually, I think I may have that wrong. Do I?
What,
Our
was that
meeting
the
in
next meeting?
September is actually the 15th.
The 15th, yeah.
So I had that wrong. I think I copied that forward from the Assembly Member Bennett. So it's the 15th. And it's probably a good thing because I think Director Mennigan is very interested in that. And so that'll work out better if she's able to be part of that. And as was mentioned earlier, Carol Fornoff is the nominee. And I apologize for not getting that done, but we had our hands full getting all the rest of the items together. And I would like to get the board thinking about after the next meeting, assuming Carol is brought onto the board, then we do need to think about recognizing Director Pace for 5 years of work getting this agency off the ground. And so I think that calls for another celebration of some kind. So more to come on that, but we probably shouldn't have the celebration until he actually retires from the board and is replaced because he keeps faking us out. But we appreciate you being here, Director Pace, and being faithful to covering the Piru Basin pumper. So thank you. And that's all I have tonight. If there are any questions, I'd be glad to answer those.
Thank you, and thank you. That item is very important that you were talking about, but I just thought it would be best if we could do that in September, so appreciate that. Next, we have our legal counsel update.
Thank you, Chair. Just two items. Just to report back and echo some of Tony's comments on AB 2201. You may recall the amendment that was made to the bill was in some ways, we think, to relieve the extra burden that was put on GSAs in terms of us verifying or providing verification to the permitting agency that certain untoward results would not occur through a permit issuance. The amendment that was made was to put a little more burden on the applicant so that the applicant had to use a consultant to make those similar determinations about the avoidance of any unfortunate or untoward results of the permit being issued. So as Tony reported, it's when I last checked the ledge record on the 15th of this month, it was sent back for a third reading, which I think it's on its way to passage. So we'll be looking at this, I think, a final bill pretty soon. And the second item is, of course, related to this, and it's another agenda item down the agenda on the actual plan we have for implementing the executive order. And I just worked in the last couple of days with the two Tonys on introducing some like prefatory language to the application. You'll see when we get to that item that I'd recommended that some language be put up front to explain to the applicant why he or she has to provide this information now, given the new executive order. So that concludes my legal report for this meeting, and of course, happy to entertain any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Seeing none, we'll move on to our GSP consultant. Thank you, Scott.
Evening, everybody. So a couple of quick items here. Current activities for your consulting team. We've been, as you've heard, working on the well permitting procedures. And so we'll hear a little bit more of that later. So I'm not going to belabor that at this point in time. We have also been working on the database management system updates to it. And so we're adding a few things in there to make it a little more useful, a little easier for people to do some sorting and selecting of data. So adding some date filters for water quality and water levels. So for example, if you want to, I only want to see water quality between 2000 and 2010, you can do that now or very soon. We've added the MTs and MOs to the hydrographs, and you can toggle those on and off. And so you see on the example here, you'll see a red line going across the bottom portion of it. That's your MT for that particular well. The MO is there in the blue line at the upper portion of the graph. So we thought that would be a nice visual for people to see. And when you're looking at it, it kind of brings it all together. And then we're still working on adding the display tab in there for the redaction of the well completion reports. Our programmer's been pretty busy this last couple of months. And so he anticipates having this wrapped up in the next couple of months. So we'll be all under control there with that. I also did want to mention that Sacramento released a new California water supply strategy document here recently. And the basic summary of some of the major elements is shown here on this slide. So there are a lot of things in there, as is customary with these kinds of documents. It's very short on detail and even shorter on where the money comes from. So it really seems like the state's going to need to rely on money from the federal government to be able to implement this kind of program. And we all recognize that the state's budget is in a state of major disarray with no audited financial statement. Therefore, they are technically in default on their existing federal grants and loans. And once again, technically cannot be awarded federal funds until that is rectified. So the state surplus in reality has evaporated. Our economist tells us that the decline in the stock market and the missed revenue projections for May, June, July, and expected for August has taken that supposed $97 billion down to maybe $6 billion. And that's your reserve for a $308 billion budget. So you're just a hair under 2% reserve, which is probably not a whole lot of money for the state. And so the LAO is running the caution flags up the flagpole right now and saying, hey, be careful, you need to reduce spending and taxes to avoid some fiscal calamity. So we're hoping that the infrastructure bills come through with some federal money to help allow these programs to continue forward. So there's a lot of moving parts to all of this. We've heard a lot of these programs before. We just need the political will and the funds to make it go forward. So I did want to comment on one thing there. This is the section of the strategy talks about state administration of potential recharge flows. Ooh, that is being perceived as a very unsettling element in the document by a lot of folks. So it basically says, if you see the little highlighted part starting here, is the state would secure all reasonably available future flood flows in the Central Valley, allowing the state to then allocate the available water in an orderly, holistic, equitable, and integrated approach. Okay, this is being viewed by many in the Central Valley as the state of California attempting to usurp the established water rights system and give the state too much authority over water supplies. It's not going over very well. Also, the wording in here is a little curious. It implies that the state doesn't have much confidence that the GSAs can handle the responsibilities given to them in SGMA. So there's things down here that say the state will help you address how to protect domestic wells and abate subsidence. Those things are clearly in the wheelhouse of the GSAs to do that. So we're not quite sure exactly what the state was intending, and maybe they just selected words that have unintended consequences when other people read the document. But this phrase is not being favorably looked at by several entities. So I'll be quiet on that. And if there are any questions, happy to try to address them.
Any questions for Tony? And seeing
Great.
none,
Thank you.
thank you very much. Appreciate it. Next up is our consent calendar.
Chair Long, it looks like there is a question from Carol Fornoff.
Oh, my apologies. Carol, please go ahead, unmute and ask your question.
So Tony, do you think this is a result of DWR reading all the GSPs and realizing that there's water out there that they can attach their name to?
Well, maybe, but I also think that there's a bit of realization that, for example, many of the adjacent water basins in the Central Valley all had a very similar solution to how they were going to get to sustainability. They were all going to capture the surface flows. And so what we had is Basin A said, I'm going to take surface flows or the flood flows. And then the next basin downstream says, I'm going to take the flood flows. And then it just kind of went down the valley that way.
Yeah.
And so when you added them all up, it was like, hang on, folks, there's not enough water for everybody to do all that you say you're going to do. So we have to have some other strategy. And I don't know if this is what DWR is thinking, is that the state has to come in and be the referee and the ultimate holder of those flood flows, and they will then dole them out as they think is appropriate and provides the maximum benefit in the area. I think that's okay. In concept, that might be a thing to do, but it also puts those GSAs who are relying on that flood flow water at a disadvantage if the state says, oh, by the way, you're only going to get 10% of what you thought you were going to get in your plan. So you got to go do something else. So I think there has to be some give and take on that. And I don't know exactly where this is going to go.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
Yeah, it is.
Good question. Thank you, Carol. Okay, next is our consent calendar. Does anyone have any questions, directors, in regards to the consent calendar? None? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you,
I'll s-
Director Pace.
I'll
Second,
second. I'll second.
Director Villasenor is a second. Any further questions? Okay, roll call, please.
Okay. Director Jackson,
Aye.
Director Kimball,
Aye.
Chair Long,
Aye.
Director Pace,
Aye.
Director Villasenor.
Aye.
Perfect.
Thank you. Motion is unanimous. Thank you. Next item is our resolution 2022-13, amending the list of authorized signers for the agency's Bank of the Sierra account. Tony Emmerich.
Chair Long, our bank has asked us for a resolution and a copy of the minutes. And so it's as simple as that, is we try to lay out, we would like to remove former Director McFadden, and we would like to add Director Kimball, and hopefully this does it. So we would ask that the board would approve this resolution, and once we get it signed and we get the minutes, then we will get that over to the bank, and they will make. Then I believe we're going to have to get signatures on the signature card or sheet, whatever they call it these days. So that will be the last step.
Any further questions? If not, we can entertain a motion.
I so move.
Thank you, Director Jackson. And second,
I'll second.
thank you, Director Villasenor. Any further questions? And a roll call, please.
Okay. Director Jackson,
Aye.
Director Kimball,
Aye.
Chair Long,
Aye.
Director Pace,
Aye.
Director Villasenor.
Aye.
Perfect.
Thank you. That's unanimous. So I appreciate that. And Director Kimball, thank you for stepping up to be vice chair and treasurer. Next up, we have is our task order for preparation of technical memorandum of land subsidence conditions. Sorry, I think I need to update my phone's font. I can't read it very well.
Chair Long, this is a task order to have Dana B. Stevens take the data set that's available from the state of California, Department of Water Resources, using INSAR technology to gather data all over the state, including our area. And I believe this is at least the second year they've gathered this data. And so during our GSP development process, there was concern expressed by several. And so this is relatively straightforward for us to ask DBSNA to use this data, to analyze it, and to prepare a technical memo for our two basins that takes a look at what has been happening and give us a light on whether there are any issues that we should be concerned about.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions for Tony on this? Sounds pretty straightforward. What we need is a motion for this for staff recommendation. And so if I can get a motion to approve.
All right, so moved.
Thank you, Director Villasenor. In a second.
Second.
Thank you, Director Jackson. And roll call, please. If there's no
Okay.
questions.
Director Jackson,
Aye.
Director Kimball,
Aye.
Chair Long,
Aye.
Director Pace,
Aye.
Director Villasenor.
Aye.
Perfect.
Thank you. That's unanimous and appreciate that. Next up, we have the development of well permitting review process in compliance with California Executive Order N722. Is that the Tony and Tony item? Who's leading on this one?
I can kick it off. After our last meeting a couple months ago, your board found favor with our draft flow chart. And so you directed us to keep working on this and to develop an information sheet that would be useful for those that are applying for well permits. I think at this point, people come to or call or email the county water resources group, and they pretty much say, hey, here's some contact information for the GSA. You need to go talk to them. And so we get either emails or phone calls saying, you know, what do I do next? And so we started with saying, let's put together a form so that we don't have to go back and forth and waste people's time on what we think is going to be needed in this interim. We had hoped to get together a verbal description of the process that your board reviewed in the flow chart, and we did not yet have that. And then eventually some text, probably for our bylaws, that would be policy, that would sort of give us the rules authority for this. I'm hoping that our policy component can be relatively skinny, and that it's looking like that AB 2201 is also trying to put most of the responsibility for well reviews upon the permit applicant and the entity that issues the permits, in our case, the County of Ventura. And I don't think as a GSA we really have a problem with that. And I'd like to pass it over to Tony Morgan to review the information form. And then Mr. O'Neill, our legal counsel, also has some language that I did not get into the agenda package, but would be some explanatory text that shows this is the county's part, this is the GSA's part, this agency's issuing the permit, and we're doing a review, and this is why, so that it's straightforward to the permit applicants.
All right, so to refresh everyone's memories, is why are we doing this? And we've sort of prepped a little bit earlier in this evening with the governor's executive order, the N722 here, and I just sort of cobbled out the pieces that were the most salient to our discussions this evening. So there's language in there about the proposed well would not be inconsistent with any sustainable management program, would not decrease the likelihood of achieving sustainability, or we have extraction of groundwater from the proposed well is not likely to interfere with production and functioning of nearby wells, existing wells, and not likely to cause subsidence, et cetera, there. So our agency would be expected to provide verification to the county that those above conditions are satisfied. So we have the additional wrinkle that AB 2201, as we've heard earlier, looks like it's on its way to passage. I looked this morning at the updated language, and there are a few additional requirements and things in there that we should touch on. And we're trying to get this permitting program to sort of wrap those both up, since it looks like 2201 is coming, and not have to go back and start over again. So what are those unique things that are in 2201? So it was alluded to that there has to be some sort of written report prepared by a licensed professional. That basically means a PE or a PG, professional engineer or professional geologist in California. It indicates the extraction of the proposed well is unlikely to cause well interference. Interestingly, 2201 doesn't say anything about subsidence like the executive order does. However, it still does mention in there the proposed well will not be inconsistent with any sustainable groundwater management program established in the GSP. So it sort of covers it in a big giant blanket kind of way. Good news is that a couple of things were considered not applicable to this new. So maintenance of a well, okay, alterations, replacement, or maintenance to a new well or to a well pump. So if you need to pull your pump, do some work on it to tune it back up, or gosh, it gets hit by lightning and you need to put a new one in, you don't have to go through this process. So that's a major concession moving forward. And so people that have an emergency, they need to get their well back on immediately. They have the ability to do that and sidestep some of this process here. So we'll give them some kudos for thinking that forward. Remembering this is the flow chart there. And so you have sort of color coded tracks there. At the top is the light green area, and that's the replacement wells track. The sort of pinkish color in the center there, that's the new M&I or irrigation well track, and the orange track down here at the bottom is the backup all alternative wells section. I do want to make sure the board recognizes, and let me see if I can zoom this in so we can actually see it. Yeah, right here in the middle, there's a built-in policy decision there that I want to make sure that the directors are aware of. And so it basically says, will groundwater extractions be exported out of the basin? If the answer is yes, we're defaulting to a disapproval of that permit. Okay, now it doesn't mean that you can't establish in the policy document that grandfathering in exports and things like that is permissible. That's your decision to do that. And if the answer is no, then you move on down through the evaluation process. So I wanted you to be aware that that is still in there. And I think that's something that the board, not necessarily this evening, but at some point in the future, we should discuss if that's the way you want that handled. Okay. Other decision points along here that we haven't covered and don't necessarily have to be in the flow chart is there a fee associated with the agency's efforts to evaluate an application that comes in? You're likely to incur some costs as staff or a consultant, whomever is engaged to review the well applications, look at the technical report from the applicant. Maybe there's some supplemental analyses, we don't know. And then to prepare a recommendation for the board's consideration. So we haven't talked about that. And that's something I think we could chat about at a later date. So the general process is envisioned to be one where we start with Ventura County's permit. Okay, and so here's the 2-page permit. It's not overly complicated to fill out. They want to know who the property owner is, who's the driller, who's going to be the inspector for the well. What are you doing? Are you drilling a new well? Are you destroying a well, etc.? Is it a monitoring well, etc. down here? How is it going to be used? It's an agricultural well, it's a domestic well, or it's a municipal well. You know, check the box and let us know what it is. How much water do you expect to extract in acre feet per year? The drilling equipment, we don't necessarily care so much about for this agency's process. And then the construction information here and where the perforations are anticipated to be. And then they do a sketch of all these things that are potentially nearby: leach fields, storm drains, barnyards, stables, etc., existing wells. And I think at least for the location of wells and things like that, your online database will be a source that the applicant can use to find those other wells that are on record. So this gives us a lot of the information to get started in doing the evaluation. There are a few things that we probably want to add to that. And so we put together this quick little supplemental well permit form that's basically this agency's form. And there's some little precursor language up here that provides a little bit of information to the applicant as to why this needs to be done, and also gives them the out that, hey, if you're looking for a monitoring well or just doing engineering test holes, etc., you don't need to fill out this form because you're not pumping water. And that's what we're primarily concerned with here. So we try to maximize the information that's on the Ventura County's form and not have them repeat too much, but we do need a little bit of overlap of information so that if this application form actually gets separated from the Ventura County form in the file, we can link them back up together and that kind of thing. So property owner, operator. One of the things we did add in here is the APN where the new well will be located. Okay. And then some information down here: proposed groundwater extraction quantity, acre feet per year. That's on the original form. How are you going to use the water? Just circle one. Okay. What's the proposed maximum groundwater extraction rate? Oh, I'm going to pump my well. I'm going to design it to do 500 gallons a minute. Let's just make up a number for that. And then some idea of what you think your pumping schedule is going to be. I know it'll change. I know it's an educated guess at this point in time. That's all. Hey, I expect to run that well 3 days a week for 8 hours a day. That's all it's looking for, just to get some idea of how long the well is going to be on. Okay. Then signature date. And then, as is always, people have explanations or comments or clarifications or whatever other information they think it would be important for the agency to do. There's a spot on the form for them to include that information. Okay. One field I didn't put on here that we might want to consider is, where is the water going? So that goes back to the export issue. Okay, so if you're the city of Fillmore and you're filling out this form, you would say it goes to the city of Fillmore, and it goes into your distribution system. If it's an agricultural well, for example, you would say, what APNs is that going to go? Is that water likely to go to? So we have some idea whether it's inside the basin, outside the basin. Again, are you moving that water from Fillmore to Piru, or the other way around, or totally outside of the basin? We just might be a good idea to have that information on here as well. And so that's one of the items I was soliciting director feedback for tonight, as to whether that seems like a reasonable thing to add to the data form. So the general process is to get the county's well permit application, get the supplemental application, and get the technical report from the applicant. Right? Then all of that information is used to sort of navigate your way along the flow chart that we just looked at. And then whoever's doing that evaluation on your behalf, is that staff, is that the consultant, whatever it is, they review all that, perform whatever additional analyses may or may not be necessary, and prepare that recommendation to come back to the board with an idea of thumbs up or thumbs down. Recommend that you agree with this well permit or not, and if not, why not, and that kind of thing. So where we're at next is, you've already got the flow chart here. Tonight we just talked about the supplemental water well permit application. Okay, as Tony mentioned earlier, we need to get some sort of policy/ordinance document describing the process. And I put in there, including the exports and fees issues to be considered, and then have the directors review and approve that policy document. So I would envision that to be sort of a companion effort between the executive director, legal counsel, and us to get a draft document to pull together for the director's consideration. So that's kind of the quick and dirty of where we are with this process at this point in time. Steve, did I forget anything?
Sorry about that. I just add that we're going to enhance, I'm going to recommend we enhance the prefatory language somewhat, just to explain why they're having to do this, because I assume to the average well applicant who's done this before, this is a new step. So we just want to explain that it's coming out of the governor's office, and this may soon change, and it may be pursuant to a new water code statute, but that this is a supplemental form. We are not the permit issuing agency. We're just offering this kind of opinion based upon the exec order or perhaps the statute. And this is not a substitute for the county. Just to give a little more background on what the process is and what findings need to be made. So, but otherwise, I think Tony's done a great job getting this on track.
I have a question. Last month, we talked about a situation where someone wanted to drill a well, which was going to replace his water source from a mutual. And I don't know enough about mutuals to know if would that water always go to another user, or might that water come out of the system? Is that something we would want to know?
Tony,
go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I don't, Director Jackson, I just don't understand the question in a way. Are you saying that this is a person who's sold their shares in a mutual? No,
it's a person who had been getting his water from the mutual, was a member of the mutual, but wanted to drill his own well and get a new well and get his water that way instead of from the mutual. So the question that came up last month, was, what happens to that water that he was getting from the mutual? Is that going to somebody else? Is it out of circulation now? Because that would make a difference for a big application, a big new well.
Yeah, I assume that if the mutual would allow someone to, well, I assume the mutual might prohibit someone from doing that. If they're part of a mutual, they may be bound to the mutual supply and not be allowed to drill their own well if they forfeit, unless they forfeit their membership in the mutual. But I'm speculating here because I think that would depend upon the mutual's bylaws. But to the extent that they're an overlying owner and haven't forfeited that right, I don't know why they wouldn't be able to do that. What do you
Well, I'm
think?
just thinking about it in terms of if we're saying, if we are saying that does not mess up, this is consistent with the plan, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's not going to interfere with neighboring wells, et cetera. If we know, if it's a new well and we know that it's not actually new water, it's just replacing another source of water, that would make a difference to what we said, as opposed to it being a new well and a new extraction. I'm just asking if that is something we should add into the flow chart, because I don't believe that situation is addressed.
That specific situation is not addressed in the flow chart. You're correct. We kind of get at it in that we want information about, is the replacement well going to pump more or less than the existing well that it's going to replace? And so I don't know if this is a very common situation to occur. Maybe the directors can weigh in on that, but I would almost be willing to recommend that we not complicate the flow chart more with that particular situation. And that giant box on the second page of the supplemental permit is where they could explain, hey, I pump 10 acre feet or whatever the number is from the mutual. I'm not going to be pumping that anymore. And the mutual has said they're not going to pump it anymore. And we get something like that from them, and then we can verify that with the mutual. Maybe we get a letter from the mutual saying, yes, that's the case. We're not going to do that, and not worry about trying to cover that sort of a one-off situation. Does that sound reasonable, directors?
I think there might be a question though when you're filling out the application. Okay, is this a new well or is it a replacement well?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, won't it ultimately come down to the determinations of potential interference, potential subsidence, maybe not if 2201 gets passed, and consistency with the GSP? I mean, those are the ultimate determinations that this statute and the exec order are requiring the GSA to make. So I think it would, and regardless of how that scenario arises, ultimately, those are the determinations that have to be made, as I see it.
Yeah, I'd comment. A lot of mutuals don't prohibit their members from owning their own wells.
Oh.
In fact, a lot of landowners have the mutual water company as backup water. And typically the mutuals allocate it based on their water, based on shareholding, but there's nothing to say that they couldn't take that unused water and offer it to others. But that's going to get really hard. I mean, even if we had a letter saying they wouldn't, without auditing their books, there's no real way to know. So
it would take another step down the road to compile all their information by mutual and say, oh, in the past they were pumping 100 aggregate and now they're pumping 110. Okay, well now they went above. So there would be more bookkeeping involved to try to audit that. And I don't know that it's worth it, to be honest. I mean, in my mind, we'll have a sustainable yield number for the basin, and we'll keep, you know, my simplistic image is we've got this side tally going on of who's pumping, and Okay, oh, new well comes in, they're gonna add another 15 acre feet to it. Okay, 15 plus the existing we have out there. Are we anywhere near our sustainable yield? If the answer is no, we say that's satisfied, keep on going, move to the next step, and we don't make that overly complicated. And I think that would be consistent with what is being asked in the executive order and also in 2201.
Director Jackson, would that be sufficient?
Yeah, I'm
enough?
happy with that. I just wanted to bring it up because it struck me as that it wasn't really addressed in the flow chart, and I'm just was
Correct.
wondering if it should be.
Okay, thank you.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Are there any
Directors,
other questions for Tony?
Chair Long, with the two that we've reviewed so far, we have asked a question, and as Tony Morgan said earlier, I don't think it's on there at this point, that asking the question, where is this water going to be used? So that has helped us to get out is this an expansion of use, or is this more on fully developed land? The two that we've reviewed so far have been alternative sources that are expected by the applicant to be more reliable than what they had. So the first one was the MVP farms, and they were part of an old Rancho Sespe shared well. And they were having problems with scheduling. And so they said, there are days when we want to irrigate and somebody else is in line and using the well, and it doesn't work out for us. So that one was important for us to know where that water was being used. It's being used on exactly the same piece of land with exactly the same crops on there. This one that was Kenter Canyon Farms, it was similar to say that the mutual was gravity and requiring a booster pump, and it also was, in their perception, a little bit less reliable and an old system. And so they desired to have a well on their site that was fully under their control. But both of those, it was very important to know, I think, that it was being used on an existing property, and the best that we could understand, it was going to continue to be used on that existing property. And it really wasn't any kind of dramatic change of use. So I think that if we're asking that question about what the parcels are and what the usage is, then that is going to get us a long way towards having a good idea about this. But I agree with the discussion earlier that if we start getting into exactly what a mutual does, it's going to be very difficult.
So I did have a suggestion, maybe that the form could include the acreage currently being irrigated, and then the acreage to be irrigated by the new well, or is there any change to the acreage being irrigated? Because we could get the APN and find out it's half unplanted, and it still wouldn't tell us if they're intending to use the new well to plant the other half or something like that.
I think that's a good idea. I think we're going to find, as we move forward, more and more people, for those reasons you stated, Tony, wanting to have control over schedules and everything else, more and more people trying to do this, and it may be an issue, and it's something I think we need to know. And I totally agree. We don't want to make it too complicated for ourselves or for the applicants, but I think it's information that it would be useful to know. And I think Gordon's suggestion is a good one. I think that would be simple, and let us know.
Yes, I agree. I'm sorry. I was going to say I agree as well with Director Kimball's suggestion to get that information on the form.
So I would just add that I realize that I will not be using this and making any decisions in the future. But if I have a well and it pumps a certain amount of water. And I use it to pump and let's say to irrigate my 50 acres. And I have capacity for that. I don't pump every day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So if I chose to plant the other 50 of my 100 acres and I have an existing well, I can just start pumping more water. I'm not adjudicating. I can still use more water and no one can say anything about it. No one on this board, no one anything. Yet if I have 50 acres and I don't have my own well, then I have to start telling people what I'm going to do with it, and everybody is going to have their say in on how I can use my land. So I don't know how all of that's going to play out in the future. If I already have a well, that means I've got freedom to do what I want. And you poor suckers that don't have a well, well, you guys are stuck to go through all these hoops. I don't know how that'll play, but just when we start looking at all these details, I can see there's going to be other questions, and just something to keep in mind as we move forward.
And I think once we do the annual roundup of all the information, you know, and the statements go out, then we'll see, hey, this person has been pumping, you know, X, and now they're X times 2. Something's changed, and we'll be able to know that.
And I think, remember, I think Tony mentioned this earlier, is that our plan did allow for change of use over our planning period. It maybe did not account for, you know, if somebody buys 1,000 acres up on the hills behind Piru and you know, thinks it's economically feasible to put a well in the basin and pump it up over the hill, that might be something that would start to get outside of what our plan could handle. But I think our plan was intended to handle the, you know, the expected changes, the change between crops on an existing parcel, things that are happening within the community of Piru or the city of Fillmore. It was intended to be able to do that and to accommodate that, but not major land use or export changes.
You're right, Tony. That's why we did the survey of users and what they expected in the future, and that's how we came up with an estimated 10% increase over time, and I suspect that 10% was padded and didn't include the kind of water efficiency efforts and improvements that are inevitably going to happen, just like the well that we approved. They will be able to use their water more efficiently, and but I believe that's what that 10% was built in for.
Okay, any other discussion on this item? So we're going to get this moving. Do we have any other question? Do you motion for staff recommendation? What's the board like?
What is the motion? I'm trying to scroll through here.
Chair Long, I think we just wanted the board to provide feedback as you have. And Tony, I think, speaking for myself, I think we have additional steps that we can take to push this forward with the discussion and input tonight.
Agreed.
So the motion is to develop the well permitting review process for in compliance with the California State Order N7.
And the key was the last few words: provide comments and direction. And I think you've done that. So I think we're good with where we are.
Okay. So do we need a motion for that? Yes or no?
I don't think we do, Chair Long.
Awesome. Moving on. Okay, thank you very much. Next item is our monitoring wells project change order authorization.
Yes, Chair Long and board, your board adopted or approved the award of the monitoring wells project at the last meeting, and authorized the chair to sign the construction agreements. And I'm happy to report that Eric got right to work after that and has worked with our driller and has gotten all the bonds and the required documents signed, and he's finalizing those now, and we'll be hunting down a signature from our chair in the next few days. One thing I realized, given the approval constraints of this agency, is that there isn't really any day-to-day approval of any kind of expenditures. Every expenditure would be required to come to the board. And being that occasionally during a well drilling process, a timely decision is needed to be made on things like, you get a geologist out on the site and you come across something that you want to change. And in this case, we would have to probably call an emergency board meeting because our agency doesn't really have any means to make that type of construction constraint. So my suggestion is, at least to start with, would be that you would authorize the executive director to make those timely change orders if needed. And let me go through a scenario on which that might be. So if, I'm planning to have Eric or Kathleen Cooper out on the site every day when drilling is taking place. And if they say, boy, we have a problem, we need to do this, this, and this, and we've got an open borehole and we need to make a decision, then I would sit down with them and pull in one of our senior geologists, and we would decide on whether that's a good request or not. And in the normal circumstance, I would have to call a board meeting and would have to get approval for that. I would like your authority to authorize those timely change orders only. If there's another example, might be if the property owner says, well, I thought I was going to allow your cuttings to be spread on the site, and that's just not going to work for me. You got to haul it off the site. That might be a change order, but it can be done at the end of the job. So I can bring that kind of a thing back to your board and ask for later. But I don't want to put us in a position where we can't get a decision and we have a collapse of an open borehole or something. So that's the nature of the request, would be that only if there's something that really is time critical that you would allow me to make that call, and then I could report it to the board at the next meeting. An alternative could be sometimes with these that it would be a retroactive approval by the board. So I could make the call. I would attempt to get a hold of Chair Long and talk that over with her. And if she's not available, our vice chair. And then we would make a decision with that, and then we would bring the retroactive decision back to the board. That is less than satisfactory, probably for a critical drilling decision, because we're going to have to pay for it anyway if it's done. But that is a way that we could do that. So my suggestion is, in this case, to allow me to make that call and then report later.
And if I could just offer, Tony, our procurement policy, we have a kind of a critical repair or critical services component, but it's limited. It's
Yes.
$1,000.
Yes.
So I think what we're talking about exceeds that
Yes.
amount. Yeah.
Yes. And I hope that all of this goes smoothly and we don't have to do it. But I just think that it really is in the idea of protecting the agency's assets and not losing a well that's in the drilling process.
Directors, do you have any questions? Director Pace?
Yeah, I was just curious how you came up with 14%. It just seems like an odd number, not 10, not 20.
That was my question too.
I'm on 5s. So 14, I just wondered if there was something behind that.
It is. It's basically budgetary amount. So I didn't want to change the line item in the budget that was dedicated towards that. I hope that we don't have any, and it might be less, but anyway, that was how I came up with that.
Thank you.
Okay, anyone else?
Yeah, I would say, having just been through drilling a well, I think this is absolutely necessary, because there's always something you learn as you go. Even if you don't have any problems, you learn, and you may want to do something. And I totally agree.
Thank you. I apologize for not thinking of this when we first did it, but I'm used to construction projects that have a little bit higher built-in approval authorities, and I missed it on this one. So I wanted to bring it back before we got to the construction.
Okay. So with that, it would be a motion to approve staff recommendation. Could I get a motion to approve?
So moved.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Director Kimball and Director Pace. And so with that, a roll call, please.
Director Jackson,
Aye.
Director Kimball,
Aye.
Chair Long,
Aye.
Director Pace,
Aye.
Director Villaseñor.
Aye.
Perfect.
Thank you. Motion approved unanimously. Next is projects and management actions.
Chair Long, I'll kick this off and then hand it over to Tony Morgan. As we discussed during our GSP development process, we had a whole list of will consider projects. And so in light of potential grant funding and other things, we are hoping to bring this back. It will likely take a couple meetings, and we'll try to spread this out so it's not a giant workshop. But I'll hand this over to Tony Morgan, and we'll kind of review those. And this is really also another one that what we would like is comments and direction from the board, not necessarily a motion at the end, but really it's to take the temperature and to see which things that you would like us to pursue further. So I'll hand it over to Tony Morgan.
Thank you. And so directors, there's a list on the screen right now of the projects that were included in the GSP document. There's also one called others. And so we're free to do the addition of additional projects that we think would be beneficial to the basins. So there's nothing that says that this 7 projects on here are the only candidates for consideration. If something else comes up and we feel it has merit, then we can certainly do that. So as Tony mentioned, the first 3 were projects that we were committed to doing. The agency's already working on the monitoring wells. That's 2 and 3. And we've had some preliminary discussions with CDFW regarding project number 1, the Cienega Springs Restoration Project. And so, oh, I like that. I have a drought refugee in my name right there, in my title. That's good. It's good. Drought refugee.
Maybe that applies to all of us.
It might, yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. That's a ubiquitous term these days. And so projects 4 through 7 are the will consider projects. And so at a future date, the board committed to saying, we'll look at those and decide which of those are helpful or useful in maintaining or achieving sustainability in the basin. And so to put a little finer point on it, there is a major funding opportunity coming up, and the documents, application forms are supposed to be coming out next month in September. And they are expecting that they want people to start thinking about $1 million as a minimum per basin that you would ask for. All right, $1 million, we'll be happy to take some of that and make some use of it, but you can go as much as 20. My rationale on these things is don't go for the max because you're in a lot of competition with the big dogs out there. So keep your request reasonable, get the money that you think you can realistically use in the time frame that the grant would be active. we get one application for basin. So this agency could have one for Fillmore and one for Piru. So potentially there could be a couple of $1 million minimum there to do something. And the one I like the best, there's no matching funds. That's an awesome element to all of this. So there's none of this 25 or 50% kind of thing that we have to worry about. So the fuse to get things going is relatively short. Of course, the state will take their time in making a decision. So it's probably not going to happen until next summer. July timeframe is their current guesstimate as to when they would make some decisions. So what might we want to think about? And so to get ready for that grant opportunity, we probably need to flesh out some of these project details a bit more. If we're going to ask for money and describe what we're going to do in the grant application, we really haven't dove into those to any degree. And I'll use the Cienega Springs here as a quick example. And so the kinds of things that we might want to start talking about is what are the start and stop triggers for supplying that supplemental irrigation water? What's the decision point? Well, how many acres are we doing now? How many irrigated acres are in this program? So we need some guidance on that from either the CDFW folks or Stillwater as a part of our team to help us figure out what we're doing there. How much water would be supplied? And I've got some ideas on how to do that. What's the source? Is it an existing well? Is it a new well? If it's existing, do we need an easement, access agreement with the owner, some sort of well sharing agreement that, hey, they use it Monday, Wednesday, Fridays from 6 in the morning to 6 at night, but on Tuesdays and Thursdays and Saturdays, we get it all day if we need it for our purposes. And then what's the condition of that well? Does it need rehabilitation, new pumping equipment? Does it need power reestablished to it? All those kinds of things that would be candidates for grant payment if we can get our act together and get all of these things lined up and prepare a list for the state to consider. I had it on here, a last minute thought is there a need for additional soil monitoring equipment to document the effect of what we're putting out there on these areas? So these kinds of things all have a monetary value associated with them. And so I think we need to have a session where we're diving into those in more detail. We're not going to go through every one of these projects this evening. I don't think it's necessary to do that, but just trying to get your brain primed to begin thinking this way. And then next month we can come back and tear into one or two of them in more detail and start talking about what the board would like to see. We have project number 6 is non-native vegetation removal. I put that on there because we've had some of those discussions at board meetings in the past. What would that look like? How many acres of land? How would we accomplish it? Are we having scores of people out there with shovels, picks, and saws and whatever to do it? Or are we coming in doing this mechanized? What's the program? What are we going to do with all that debris we have? Are there follow-up treatments? There usually are for these kinds of things. Well, how many for how long? And then finally, the benefit there. What kind of water do we think we would conserve if we did that program? What did it look like? You know, there's X number of acre feet per year per acre of Arundo. So how much water do we think we can save? And then we've talked before about the need to have a coordinated upstream removal program. We can take great pains and do a lot in our basins, but if we just get repopulated from the upstream patches of Arundo, then we've kind of shot ourselves in the foot and spent a lot of money and effort and didn't really necessarily get the bang for the buck that we had hoped for. One thing that came up in discussions recently is some sort of evaluation of domestic well vulnerability. Okay, and I can tell you that is front and center, one of DWR's hot buttons. And they are all over that in a lot of basins. And so domestic wells are often difficult. The records are generally not as thorough as municipal wells or irrigation wells from that. And so it's oftentimes necessary to go door to door to get information, or a mailer goes out to people to get information on it. What's the depth of your well? Where are the perforations? Where's the pump set? Those kinds of things. Are we going to measure water levels in those shallow domestic wells? Because we generally don't have that kind of information. And if the answer is yes, how do we do that? I can tell you right now, if I'm domestic well owner, I'm going to tell the agency, no, my pump is working just fine. Don't mess with it. And many domestic wells are relatively small diameter. They're not set up to have a place where you can get a sounder down there or put in a transducer. There's just not room down there with all the pump and wiring and everything that's already down there. So that's an issue on how we would actually accomplish that. You know, there are some folks out there in other basins who have done some generic templates of how a domestic well is constructed. Oh, they're typically this deep. They typically have this much well screen. Pumps are set typically this depth above the well screen, that kind of thing. And they did their evaluation based on that. That's not necessarily bad, but it's their way of getting beyond that data shortage issue that they have. So all of those things require time, effort, which equates to money to be able to do. And they are all what I think very strong candidates to be put into the grant application so that we're able to recoup some of those funds and minimize the impact we have on the fees associated to each stakeholder. And so I think my vision is that if we have these conversations and we go through all these and we work out the costs, that we end up with some sort of summary table of a project. And this is just a few of them that we talked about tonight on here. And I threw some things under the pros and cons. And then under the estimated cost column, we would have to come up with some numbers. It's just what's a new pump and well going to cost? What do we think our overall O&M costs? And we can work that out. You know, once we understand what the project scope is like, we can do that. So that's kind of where I wanted to get tonight, was to get you thinking along this thought process, and then we'll come back next month and we'll jump into a couple of these and try to tear into the ones in more detail. I'll probably pick the two that I think would likely have the largest economic impact. We'll start with those. And so we're gathering the information, getting the board's input on which of these we want to put in a grant application, and then how much money do we wish to ask for. So we need to get a little more guidance from you guys on the scope, some general technical approach that we can talk about next time, and that. So that's the approach for this, and I'll open it up for any questions as you deem appropriate.
Thank you, Tony. I think this is a really valuable conversation for our directors and the public to be talking about. I'd like to open it up to directors and ask any questions or comments from them. So who would like to go first?
I will, of course.
Okay.
Just one question. What's the time frame on the grant? Is it how many years does it cover? Is it a multi-year grant?
I think just joined us. Oh, can you hear me?
I'm trying to remember if this particular grant is multi-year. Usually it's 18 months.
Okay, so there's not a whole lot of time to get stuff done. Okay.
Right.
Okay. Anyone else?
Yeah, Tony, I agree. I think the Cienega project is high priority because it needs to be high priority. And I do think the domestic well issue clearly is a hot button from the Valley. And because we chose to put our minimum threshold below historic minimum, we do put wells at risk. And I'd be shocked if DWR doesn't flag this in our program. So I do think that's a high priority one, and I think DWR will be happy to see it high priority. Following up on that, I don't know where subsidence falls. We talked about doing a survey or having a survey done of critical infrastructure, and then maybe putting in each basin a permanent GPS station, so we have almost a day-to-day or a year-to-year accurate data. And those are not, I don't think that's a huge project. But again, even though subsidence probably doesn't affect us, I wonder if DWR seeing that in there would help us. I'm a little skeptical. I know the vegetation removal sounds really good and everybody likes it, but I'm with Tony. If we don't start at the headwaters of where this first starts and work down, you can remove it, but then you have to have any effect, you have to maintain it. And the grant probably is not going to give us the funds to continue to do whatever it does to keep it from regrowing. So I think that one's, to me, more problematic. But thank you, Tony, and I'm looking forward to a good discussion.
And just to add to your comment there, you just approved this evening the subsidence update tech memo. So we'll be able to have more information to share with you when we get to that discussion on that topic.
Yeah, and I think for me as an engineer, the problem we will, and that's good. And if we continue to get that data every year, we can use it to monitor it if we go below those levels. Because that's the thing that really worries me is being able to say to DWR, look, we're going to monitor it day by day, week by week, or month by month. You know, if we drop below those levels, we're watching subsidence and the yearly update, and those are not guaranteed to continue. Although I suspect it's likely they will. But that was my only concern, and the two permanent stations are not. There, I think I remember there were $60,000 or something each
About right.
to install, but the annual maintenance and operation is probably quite a bit less, and it just seems like that's something we could do in the 18 months, put it in, and the ongoing costs would be small, and we can say to DWR, look, we're watching it, and you know, if we drop below, we'll know it's happening. So just.
Okay, I want to make sure that all know that Candace Minigan has been able to join us. Director Minigan is here. Director Minigan, you have your hand raised for a question. Please go ahead.
Yeah, hi everybody. I apologize for being late. I just got the tail end of the project scopes and heard Gordon's comment about the non-native vegetation removal. And I did want to say that I recently had a conversation with Tom Dudley, who's with UC Santa Barbara. And they've been doing a lot of arundo removal as part of UC Santa Barbara's riparian invasion laboratory and with Santa Clara River Conservancy. And one of our board members who's with Channel Islands has been an operator there. And Friends of Santa Clara River has also joined the arundo like watershed wide task team. So Tom's group has just recently gotten IRWM disadvantaged engagement program funding through the IRWM DAC process, and they are starting in headwaters. I think there's been a focus on the lower nodes where we know there's ecological importance but there is an acknowledgement through the task force speaking to the concern that we do need to do stuff in the headwaters. So I think maybe a recommendation that we could do is ask Tom to come and talk about that grant and how that works, and maybe how our arundo work within our basins may complement the greater effort. Because I think, you know, there's also opportunities for the GSA to provide matching funds for work within the basins, but then we also piggybacking off of other efforts, and it's not necessarily pulling away from our resources and personnel that are putting forward other priorities. But I do agree with others that the Cienega site and the domestic wells are also very high priorities. And considering that the Arunda removal is being done on a larger effort, it might behoove us to get more familiar with that process and see how our efforts with Arunda removal might complement that.
Chair Long, I wanted to, I wanted to make you aware that Carol Fornoff had a comment in the chat. So whenever I know Director Villaseñor also has her hand up.
Okay, let's have Director Villaseñor first, and then we'll go to Carol's comment. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you. Can you hear me? Sorry about my connection.
Yes, no problem.
Okay, great. So my comments were regarding the project to better identify and gather information on vulnerability of domestic wells. I think that one's really important. I think at our last meeting, Director Menachine had discussed, and I believe it was
No.
Director Villaseñor, you dropped off. Are you there? I think it shows that you're muted. Somehow your phone got muted.
okay. Sorry, am I back now?
Yes.
Okay, my apologies. I'll make this quick. I think if having that information
Okay, we dropped you again. I'm sorry. Are you there?
would love to know more about Arunda removal of what Director Menachine was mentioning, as well as any collaborative partnerships that we may do with other basins or other regional water agencies that are further upstream, and see if there's something that might be there. As you mentioned, the issue is having Arunda further upstream. Well, if it's a more regional issue, maybe it'd be a more impactful regional project to work together. So that's just my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think we got that. It dropped a little bit, but I think based on the nod from Tony, I think we got your information on that. Okay, moving on to Carol Fornoff. Your question?
I can just read the question in the chat. She said, I agree with Gordon on the Cienega and domestic wells. Those 2 projects should be a slam dunk for DWR.
Okay, thank you. I also had a question in regards to the Santa Clara watershed. If we're working with them on the chloride issue, if there's any projects that we need to do to make sure that the contaminants coming into our basin is either stopped or altered, is that something of a group project that we do for grants to make sure that our partners coming into our basins are taken care of? Does anyone have any information on that?
Chair Long, I wasn't completely able to hear you, but I think you mentioned the Santa Clarita Valley Sanitation District's chloride project. Was that what?
Yes, sorry, thank you.
I believe that project is fully funded and in construction. And as this group knows, it did go through some legal challenges on how to dispose of the chloride, and now they're concentrating it and they're trucking it to Carson. But I believe that they're in construction at this point. Okay. And so they will be in compliance with the regional boards, or their goal is to be in full compliance with the regional boards order on that chloride. I believe that they asked for a time extension recently, but I believe that is all funded. So I don't know if that one's a good if that one's a candidate for this kind of a grant.
Okay. And is there anything in which we can be capturing more stormwater? More capacity to hold water. Is there anything that anyone knows of that we can be working on in regards to infrastructure, you know, groundwater absorption. Is there anything that United or any other group has thought that would be something we could be working on?
For sure. Tony, let me answer that as director. For sure, what we can do is support United's efforts to enhance and improve and continue to use the Freeman diversion. And I know they're making efforts to take dirtier water, not have to wait till it cleans up so they can take more stormwater. But and I know it doesn't help our basin specifically, but regionally, that's a huge gain. And I'll let Tony answer about how we can help our basins.
And then, Chair Long, there are many things that we can do, but there's very little that we could probably do within a 1.5-year time frame on permitting and CEQA and or NEPA review, but maybe for another round.
Okay, well, I wasn't sure if it's something that we can piggyback on with the county on stormwater, you know, capture, or Lake Piru with what's going on there and that cleanup. I'm looking at, you know, anything that our cities or the unincorporated area can help with. We have our stormwater project that's in Ventura County. So just looking ahead, maybe to put us in a better position for the next grant process.
You know, Chair Long, there probably is one now that you mentioned that. It's not necessarily a United project, but it's a project that United's a co-conspirator on. Is the county stormwater program worked a few years ago to divert some of the stormwater flow from the community of Piru to the existing recharge basins that are there that United owns. And I know there is a phase 2 to that. And I believe that was being held up by a easement that was required from I believe that Camulos Ranch is the property owner there, and they were having trouble getting a hold of all the members of that ownership group. And I apologize for not knowing where that one is, but that one could be a joint stormwater quality and recharge project. And if they're close to having that you know, right away access, then that one might be something that could be constructed within this time frame.
Okay. Yeah, we'd have to get with county and find out where exactly that is.
I will put that on my list to follow up with Evelina on that one.
Thank you.
From a pragmatic standpoint, I would also remind the board that we have the unique situation in these two basins that they percolate water very, very well. And so to the extent that we want to construct man-made facilities, let's make sure we're taking advantage of everything we have naturally out there and avoid the cost and maintenance issues associated with constructing new retention basins and things like that. We percolate a lot of water when it's available. A lot of water goes into the subsurface in these two basins. And so those are the things when I hear people talk about an urban stormwater capture. Well, even if let's just say it's Fillmore, for example, even if that water runs off there, it goes out into an area that has a very high infiltration capacity and many acre feet a year percolate into the basin. So we're catching it sort of naturally. And in some respects, we don't have to do a whole lot for that. But just wanted to remind you that we're very lucky with the sediments we have here.
Thank you, Tony. I appreciate that. And, you know, it's like, is there any issues with any of the locations where we have to slow the water down and we don't get to, you know, absorb it as quickly? You know, what are those little things that we could possibly just make a little better? But maybe there's not any this time. I'm not sure. Okay. Any other further discussions on this? Candace had a question in regards to what is the status of the Faro Basin? Faro Basin?
Yeah, so with Santa Clara Levy 3 that's being upgraded with the new FEMA maps, there's the Faro Basin that's just north of that, and that's a place where we could be infiltrating water. Again, it's outside of our basin, but it is like within the complex of Great Oven and Freeman efforts. And I was just wondering if that project's moving forward at United at all.
Director Bennigan,
The
yes.
levy moved forward in planning, but that component kind of did not go in a comparative parallel process to the levy. So I was just wondering if that's totally stalled or if it is moving forward.
Director Bennigan, it is. So the plan exists to utilize that. That's more of a wet weather project. So in wetter years, but it is really important in the wet years to have that extra groundwater recharge capability.
Mm-hmm.
And so the phases that are being implemented right now are removing some of the bottlenecks in the existing conveyance. And then there's a grant application in actually there's a part of the grant that the Fox Canyon GMA accepted removes a couple bottlenecks. And then there's another grant application to build the undercrossing for the canal under the Vineyard Avenue, essentially. So yes, it is still alive, and I hope to see a year when this region needs all that recharge capacity. It hasn't been very useful lately because we just haven't had that much water. But yes, it is still alive.
All right, thanks for the update, Tony.
You're welcome.
I mean, I think that's just simple, something our GSA would want to support if it comes to, and if that ask comes to us.
All right, any other update or information? Questions, suggestions? Tony, you stated that this will come back to us. Will that be at the next meeting, or if we have any ideas, submit it? What do you want our directors to do?
I think
yeah.
Go ahead, Tony.
I was just going to say, if we hope to make the grant deadlines, I think we need to keep pushing on this. So
Agreed.
I would hope that we could bring as much forward as we can at the next meeting.
So in the meantime, if you directors have any suggestions, questions, comments, submit them to Tony Emmerich to pass along to Tony, or what would you like that process?
Yes, I would be glad to accept those. I'll be working with Tony Morgan, and if you have any good ideas or recommendations, please share those with me, and Tony Morgan and I will be working on fleshing this out further.
I just appreciate that sometimes we leave a meeting and then you're like, oh, there was that one idea. It was just amazing. And I want to make sure that we have this free flowing so that we'll be able to make some good movement if possible. All right. So thank you very much on that. So that's just a discussion item. So there's nothing else on that. And then I think that is the last item on the agenda. Is that correct?
It is.
Okay. So that is the last item on the agenda. Does anyone have any future items that they would like to bring up? Might as well ask that one. Usually do. Okay. With that, then we will adjourn to the next meeting. I really appreciate your time and effort. And everyone, please stay safe. And as we adjourn, we just adjourn in memory of Supervisor Carmen Ramirez. Just keep our family and thoughts and prayers.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I don't know what happened.